So we started the transition movement in 2005, 2006, and the idea of it was that it would be a catalyst for supporting communities to relocalize their economies wherever they are. We call it a movement of communities who are reimagining and rebuilding the world. So it always has that element of we have to create the imagining space, because otherwise we just do what has always been happening. But we also have to get on and actually be building what comes next. So when you look across the transition movement, and you can now find transition groups in about 50 different countries around the world, you see a real diversity of projects. So some of them are starting community energy companies, some of them are starting a real dazzling array of different local food projects, projects around communities becoming their own housing developers, a whole range of different things. But what runs through all of it is a belief that we need to start modeling the changes that we need to see at the community scale, at the local level. We need to be looking at local economies as the foundation for this, and to be making those communities, making those economies more diverse, more resilient, and increasing community ownership and democracy. And so it's really been a kind of a living, breathing, self-organizing experiment for 17, 18 years. Makes me feel very old. And something where really our role in Transition Network has been to look out for those stories, to collect those stories. So in many ways, it's like a movement of stories. We always say all the resources are free, everything's free. The only commitment is that you share your stories back into the movement. So in terms of when we use the word transition, what we're talking about is a transition from a kind of extractive, fossil fuel driven economic model which benefits very, very few people and drives inequality and kind of imposes a new model of colonialism on many parts of the world to benefit the other parts of the world, towards one which is more local, resilient, diverse, with different economic models. And I guess the thing that always really intrigues me about that is that the work that I've been doing more recently is about the imagination and the radical imagination. I wrote a book called From What Is to What If, about why we need to boost our kind of collective imagination muscle, because as Bell Hooks says, what we cannot imagine cannot come into being. We need to be able to imagine things before we can build them. And so for me, one of the things that's lacking in our current globalized economic model, as there was with colonization and slavery and so on, is curiosity. You know, why that mindset that would look at indigenous cultures and just think, right, okay, well, we need to get rid of that lot and get rid of that, and we need to get to the resources. No curiosity about what's already working, and the same with globalization, which just looks at the world in terms of resources and numbers and populations. And so in the transition movement, it's very much about trying to boost the imagination and the curiosity of the communities we're working with. I mean, for me, in the work that I do around imagination and the need to boost our collective imagination, the most inspiration I get by a long way is Black women activists in the United States. People like Adrienne Marie Brown, Walida Imarisha, Mariam Kaba, people who are working and who are recognizing, Aisha Shillingford, people who are recognizing the need to make space for the radical imagination, because um, because this is a poly crisis that it demands that we reimagine everything, and it demands that we move to alternative ways of doing things, which means we need to celebrate those people who are already modeling alternative ways of doing things: trans people, LGBTQ plus people, communities of color, indigenous people who are already kind of way ahead in terms of working in a way which is kind of otherwise, which is different to the kind of business as usual standard model. So for me, I learned so much from those movements, from those explorations, from Afrofuturism, from these models which are about how when we tell a different story about the past, it allows us to tell different stories about the future. One of the things I learned doing the research about imagination was when we're being the parts of our brain that we use when we're being imaginative and imagining the future are pretty much the same parts of the brain as when we're remembering the past. So imagination and memory are very, very similar, because when we're being imaginative, it's like we're going to the cupboards of our memory and looking through them and going, what happens if I put this together with this? And that's the imagination piece. So if you just watch Fox News all day and read the Daily Mail, it's really hard to imagine a low carbon society, because you've got nothing, you've got no material to work with at all. So no wonder people go, well, it's just not going to be possible, because you go to your cupboards and the cupboards are bare. And so it feels to me like one of the main things we need to be doing in our movement is filling people's cupboards with stories. It's why here today I tried to give a very practical, real story of what we're doing in my town. And I kind of collect and share those stories when I give talks. I'm just saying, here they're doing this, here they're doing this, here they're doing this. This is how it works. So that afterwards, people, when they try to imagine the future, they've got all sorts of material to work with. So in my town, I'm involved with a project called Totnes, which is where the community is trying to become its own developer. It's like a community-led development project on an old milk factory site that was the biggest employer in our town. 160 people lost their jobs. It was a big blow to the town. And we've been working since to say the community should become the developer here. We did a consultation in a town of 9,000 people that more than 4,000 people contributed ideas to. We master planned it based on what the community needs rather than what a private developer needs, which is normally what we get. And then we're now in a big sort of fight process towards getting the site into community ownership. But the important thing about it for me is that the model that underpins it is deeply transformative, because normally what happens with development is a developer identifies a site, they buy the land, they design something that meets their own needs, they extract the profit, and we're left with what they've designed. And up and down the country, you see the sort of paucity of the imagination in 95% of built environments created through that model. In our model, the idea is because it's community owned, we have access to borrowing money from a much wider range of sources or different ways of doing it. We design something based on what the community needs, which we know because we consulted with them extensively. It's built in such a way that it will build a new economy, create space for a new economy for the town, all kinds of opportunities, but the community will own it forever. So it means that we borrow money from pension funds, like over 30 years at lower interest rates because it's over a longer period of time. But once you've paid that back, you've designed a scheme that's generating £2-3 million every year in rental income for the community to decide what it wants to do with. So I keep saying to people, imagine if we had done this, someone had done this in this town 30 years ago, how different would our approach be to climate change, social justice, COVID and stuff if we had that? That's what's transformative about it. So I meet so many people who say, I'm hopeless, nothing is happening, nobody's doing anything. I have the great kind of privilege in the work that I do I don't fly, so I just travel as far as I can get by train. So I travel all around Europe, going to see, meeting with different communities, seeing what they're doing. There is so much happening. Everywhere you go, there is so much happening. You never read those stories in the papers, you never see them on TV, but they're all out there. And often when people say to me, how can I feel more hopeful in my life? I say, well, all of us have created for ourselves a social media feed of different stuff that comes into our heads from different places, usually just a unrelenting torrent of kind of, it's too late, we've had it, it's extinction, all that sort of stuff. I'd find those stories. Positive News is a brilliant source of those stories. Transition Network feeds on social media stuff. We Are Possible. I'm really good at finding those stories. There are people who are putting those stories out there, and go and see them. Like go and visit. Last year I went to Freiburg in Germany, to the Vauban, biggest car-free neighborhood in Germany. 3,000 people live in this neighborhood. No cars. You walk around, you think, wow, there was a permaculture designer here about 20 years ago, because there's these fruits and these berries, and all the homes are very energy efficient, ecological buildings, just amazing. And to be in a neighborhood with no cars, you really appreciate how different the acoustics are and how different it sounds and what you hear that you don't normally hear. So I think it's so important that we find those stories, celebrate those stories, take some of our money out of the bank or out of our pension and invest in some of these things that are happening. It's like the new world. What's Arundhati Roy say? That another world is not only possible, she's on the way. she's on her way on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And we all need to get much better at hearing her breathing, because if you stop and you listen, you can hear it.